Yes, I do think consuming meat alternatives can significantly reduce harm to animals if enough people uh, consume them and thereby also, of course, reduce their meat intake. And I think that is a moral imperative because, well, we now know that at least most animals, if not all animals that we use for meat consumption, are sentient creatures. So that means that they subjectively can experience pain and pleasure, but they also have, well, lives that can go better or worse for them. They are social animals. They have goals in their lives. They have agency. So all of these qualities in humans we think are enough to warrant that humans have moral status. So if animals have these same characteristics, I do believe that we should also take their interests into account when we make moral decisions. So that means indeed we do have a moral imperative to reduce our meat consumption because, well, farming animals in general, especially in intensive farming systems, very much harms their welfare. And it limits their capacities, for example, for social behavior, for their agency, and for reaching their own goals in life. It also cuts their life short, of course. So, for example, um, pigs, even if you give them a very good life, you still end up slaughtering them after 7 months when they're 7 months old. So, in pig terms, then they're teenagers and they don't get to live out the rest of their lives. So, that even if you would do so called animal friendly farming, it would still be problematic from a moral perspective to kill them and then consume them. Most people have actually been raised with eating a lot of meat. It's the standard, it's the default, it's the way in which they've learned how to cook for themselves. It's part of their culture. So it's very much part of, well, how we've been raised. Um, so that's one reason. The other reason is that most people really enjoy eating meat. And that leads us to the so called meat paradox. So many people really enjoy eating meat, but at the same time, many people also say that they don't want to harm animals and harm their welfare and that they care about animals. So that creates sort of like a paradox, and that creates what we call cognitive dissonance in our head, which is a tension, which is not a pleasant feeling because there's different values that are sort of struggling with each other. And the way that people tend to solve this tension is by using coping strategies, usually not consciously. And so a coping strategy could be, for example, well, the animals that we farm for meat, we especially farm them for meat. So they're different than other animals. People also, which is what research shows, tend to think that pigs, for example, are less intelligent than dogs, which has been proven not to be the case. But this is a way for us to, uh, well, to reconcile ourselves with the tension that we care for animals, but also want to eat them. If they're just not very intelligent, then apparently it's less problematic to eat them. And there's many other coping strategies that people use to still, well, I suppose justify that they're still consuming meat. And that makes it very difficult because it's very difficult to actually counter these coping strategies. For one thing, because they occur mostly subconsciously, and if you give arguments against one of the coping strategies, so for example, if you point out that actually pigs are very intelligent animals, and you give examples of that, then another coping strategy will start rising up. So, for example, people might say, "Yeah, but it's not my responsibility. It's the responsibility of the government to actually set adequate welfare standards, or it's the responsibility of the farmer to look after the welfare of animals." At the same time, farmers, they shift the responsibility as well. They say, "Well, as long as consumers are not willing to pay more for their meat, we're not going to be able to farm them in a more animal friendly way." And so that's how coping strategies work, and that's why it's so difficult for people to actually reduce their meat intake. As an animal ethicist, I would like to think that moral considerations play a big role in popularizing meat alternatives. But on the other hand, has since the publication of Peter Singer's Animal Liberation in 1975, there's already been a lot of moral arguments about meat reduction. And so I think most people have been exposed to these arguments, but it has led to only a very small portion of the population turning vegetarian or vegan or going for meat alternatives. So perhaps it's not rational argumentation on its own that will popularize meat alternatives. I think it's also, well, emotions. We have to look for people's compassion, see if they can actually identify with animals. And that actually might help much more than just giving rational argumentation. Now, of course, appealing to people's emotions and increasing their compassion, that's also a part of what morality is, right? Morality is not only about rational argumentation. So when we're trying to popularize this, I think it's important to indeed appeal to people's emotions and actually show people what it is that they're replacing. So show the way animals are being kept. Um, and I think that's generally kept away from a larger audience, right? It's very difficult for people to know what goes on at farms or what goes on at slaughterhouses because it all takes place far away from, yeah, from our view. Soy production in general, you could say, is a problem, but it's not so much a problem in terms of meat alternatives because humans actually consume a very small portion of the total amount of soy that's being produced. I think it's somewhere around 6% of all the soy that's being produced worldwide is consumed directly by humans. And by far, most of it is actually produced to be fed to farm animals. And it's, of course, very much an environmental problem because the soy is produced often in South America, then it's shipped to Europe and to China. That also leads to a lot of emissions, the shipping process alone, and then it's fed to animals so that they can convert it to animal protein for us. But that's a very inefficient way of going about it, of course, because I believe a cow would need to eat about 10 kilos of vegetable protein to produce 1 kilo of cow protein, of meat protein for us. So eating it directly is much more efficient. And so I think the meat alternatives as such are not the problem. The problem is actually the soy that is being grown for feeding to animals.